Welcome to part 1 of the Educational Models Project, The Flipped Classroom, presented by Joanne Pfeiffer. Allow me to begin with a brief explanation of what a flipped classroom is. Celine Provini, in an article found on educationworld.com, explains a flipped classroom this way. Flipping the classroom means using web-enabled instructional strategies that allow educators to spend class time interacting with students rather than lecturing. Most often, this involves assigning students an instructional video to watch online as homework, while problem solving or other hands-on work occurs during class time. So how is teaching a flipped classroom made possible? I would like to briefly explore, first of all, what teachers should do to implement a flipped classroom. First of all, a teacher should allow time for experimenting with the technology tools. This could best be accomplished in the summertime when there's more time to figure out what works best. Secondly, it is advised to select simple, accessible, yet familiar technology. This allows the transition into a flipped classroom to go much more smoothly as families learn how this is supposed to work, and also doesn't put a burden on them to make big purchases to accommodate a flipped classroom. Also, the advice is to begin small scale. Don't do too much at once. For example, if you were to be very ambitious and try to record an entire semester's worth of classes up front, you may find a couple weeks in that there are some things that need to change, and then the work would have been wasted. So the advice is start small. Also, it has been advised to prepare students and families for the transition. As with anything that's new, it is always advisable to be sure that students, and especially their parents, understand what will be expected of them. In addition to building video presentations to accomplish a flipped classroom, it is also advisable to promote reflective activities. This bridges the gap between passive watching and actually engaging in the content and ensuring that information has been processed. Next, let us consider some pitfalls to avoid when teaching in a flipped classroom. First of all, it is common to assume all lecture translates well into digital mediums. However, this is not the case, so it takes discernment to figure out what should be pre-recorded and what would be best taught in person. Secondly, a pitfall to avoid is to assume that students know how to learn from digital presentations. Probably the best way to combat this pitfall is to watch the first video or two together in class, stopping the video occasionally to explain to a student how to process the information that's being presented. Thirdly, it is advised that teachers avoid assuming that students will responsibly watch and process all presentations. As is normal with human nature, students are going to try to find the easy way out. To avoid this pitfall, it has been advised that quizzes or other assessment tools be incorporated with the videos so that the student has to interact with the material. Finally, another pitfall to avoid is assuming that pre-made resources are sufficient. While resources like Khan Academy and YouTube are filled with videos on all kinds of topics, they may not be the best choice. One resource specifically advised that teachers create their own videos so that they can be tailor-made to line up with what the problems and projects following will be. Finally, allow me to share some tips and strategies for success in a flipped classroom. First of all, it's been advised that teachers practice the 80-20 rule. This means that after a video has been watched, that the class time should be composed of 80% project work or problem solving and only 20% of teacher talking and explaining things. Excuse me. A second tip for success is to be available for help outside of class. One idea was presented that the teacher made herself available for an hour or so a couple nights a week by being online. She published those times in advance so that families would know when she could be reached, and she was reachable via online chat systems, whether that be Google Chat or a different instant message system. A third tip for success is to keep video presentations concise. And in an effort to do that, I will move to the next point. A fourth tip for success is to consider the classroom space so that you can accommodate the projects in class. When lecturing, not much space is needed, simply a place for students to sit and take notes. But if the projects require more space and students to be able to move around, then perhaps a different arrangement of the classroom would be necessary. Finally, a great tip for success in a flipped classroom is to communicate, communicate, communicate. If parents and their children are aware of what's expected of them in a flipped classroom approach, the results will be much better. And the flip side of that is for the teacher to accept feedback. No doubt there will be things that need to be tweaked and changed to make this approach successful. It is advisable that the teacher be open to that feedback and willing to make changes. Flipped classroom teacher Shelley Wright documented on emergingedtech.com that she no longer has a classroom. She has a collaborative problem-solving studio. How great is that? The information compiled in this video was found in the references listed on this slide.